Do YouTube, it's your boy Tony Vogue, E-Boy, Zombie Slayer here, reactor to all things science, spooky, and conspiracy. Well, tonight, you've heard of AI, you've heard of Petri dish brains. Well, growing living rat neurons to play Doom. My question is,
this video is brought to you by Squarespace. Inside your head is one of the greatest computers in the universe, which is surprising because I've seen your browser history and yes, you do need to eat more fiber. But generally, the human mind is one of the most capable learning machines we know of, composed of 86 billion neurons and another 90-odd billion glia and other cells, with wires forming trillions of connections. And while humans do have very impressive brains, even small numbers of neurons are capable of learning complex behaviors. A few hundred can control microscopic animals like tardigrades. A few tens of thousands can control insects. Billions, and you've got a mind capable of reason, logic, math, and art. However, there's a problem.
It's just that the brain is made out of meat.
What
brain
does the thinking, then?
The brain does the thinking. The meat.
That means we can't use all that computing power unless it's attached to more meat. So until our meat robot is finished, we can't do much. And no, that's not a euphemism. We're building a meat robot. If you want to see us build the first pieces of it, there's a link below.
Oh god.
But what if we can grow the neurons directly attached to a computer from the start? Then we might be able to use them as a tool to control things for us. Living neurons are a lot more capable.
Gretchen, he just casually said they're building a meat robot. That just went over my head. What? Homeboy, what?
Capable of learning than the simulated ones we use for AI, at least in theory. So we're trying to do just that. This weird-looking device is a prototype neural multi-electrode array. It's got a bunch of microscopic...
Do you remember when they was doing shit with foreskins?
Electrodes in it with tens of thousands of living brain cells growing on top. And today we're going to be talking about how we made it and how to grow neurons. But those electrodes aren't just decorative. This array is designed to be connected to a computer, and through that connection, the neurons are being trained to play Doom. While that probably sounds impossible, it's actually anything but. We're building on decades of neuroscience and previous examples of groups using living neurons to control things. For example, several years ago, a group from the University of Florida trained a dish of rat neurons to fly a plane in a simulation, and were a lot of the inspiration for this project. The neurons had to control the pitch and roll of the aircraft and keep it steady, which it handled well even when turbulence or wind was introduced. Others have used living neurons to control little robots. This one from Reading University in the UK uses ultrasonic distance sensors to tell the array of living neurons about the robot's environment, and let it decide what to do about it, which manifests naturally as active hazard avoidance. Most recently, a group got a batch of neurons to play Pong, which may sound less impressive than the other examples, but the way they handled their sensory input into the neurons was really clever and is where we're taking a lot of the inspiration in our control scheme, though we're going to get to that in a second. Point is, neurons are little prediction machines, so if you design the stimulus you feed them correctly...
Oh, quiet. Just gotta say, what the fuck, man? They're building meat robots. Now this is a 27-minute, half-hour video. It might go a little
you can make them learn to control anything, at least in theory.
What?
I know Kung Fu.
Now, the reason we chose Doom is because it's a sufficient signal to customer to interact with or pick up, and if they're near a wall. They also need to know if the clip of the gun is empty and their health status. The other thing to know is that neurons like some types of electrical noise and dislike others. Repetitive, predictable noise, like a simple tone or repeating pulses, they like and will cause them to spike more. Chaotic, unpredictable noise, they dislike and will actively try and minimize. Let's look at one example and see how locating an enemy would work. With only 2 electrodes, there's a way to encode where an enemy is relative to the player. I think the easiest way to understand this is to experience it, so here's what I want you to do. If you're watching this with headphones on already, congratulations, you don't need to do anything. But if you're not, pause the video and grab headphones. Don't worry, we'll wait while you do.
One eternity later.
Alright, are you back? Okay, good. I'm going to put you into the perspective of the array. Listen to the tones as the player turns. We may actually use a third electrode as an added stimulus for when an enemy is straight ahead, but I think you can see how it's fairly easy to figure out where the target is just with two. There's a natural point when the player is aimed directly at the enemy where the tones line up. For multiple enemies, we'll just program it to prioritize whichever enemy is closest to start with, but eventually a much larger array could include a lot more stimulus to track multiple enemies at once. This isn't actually all that different from how some missiles. Every time they get a kill, every stimulation electrode will play a pleasant tone. If they get killed, say by walking into a hazard or losing health, every stimulator electrode will play an annoying tone for a moment. So yes, we are trying. He actually knows the best way to grow them. Literally every company and academic lab does it differently. And while there are some commonalities, the only way we were going to figure out which particular witch's brew works best and how delicate the little bastards actually saw the effect of this in the experiments that you'll see in a second. So we'll be growing a normal 12-well plate of neurons to figure out the correct density, using the following amount of neurons to them. Once we found a few that held liquid, they were rinsed out and then stain. It goes from looking like shattered snot to a galactic web. Not only can you see the incredibly dense network that has already formed, you can even see what looks like synapses. And the incredible green color means they are all very healthy. At the highest density, it's more of the same, but you can get a better idea of what the blobs look like. They're made of a shell of neurons with a core of tangled dendrites. But also look at how many connections they've made. So I'd call that a huge success. We can clearly grow and maintain neurons and keep them healthy. Now, let's jump ahead a few days to day 10. At this point, things look at a dense network that will both let in more light and more air. But otherwise, I'd say this has been a big success.
These motherfuckers making neuron chips, man.
Can definitely now grow neurons and keep them alive in culture, which means we can check off the first step of our tech tree. So where do we go from here? Well, let's wrap this video up by talking briefly about what's coming up in the series. If we look at the main quest line, you can see that next up is getting signals out of the arrays. This means we'll need to finalize the array design or buy a commercially made one, and finish our electronics. We already started building and testing that side of this project and currently plan on using this amazing little chip, which is a purpose-built neuron amplifier. It's made by a company called Intan Technologies, and they have chips that either only do recordings or chips that do both recordings and stimulation. So we're currently looking at buying the head stages from them, which include the chip, and then building our own backend for it. That said, if you're from Intan and you're watching this and want to send us one of your lovely complete systems, we would be happy to show it off and use it. Beyond that, we have a set of side quests, which I mentioned near the beginning of the video. One issue is that neurons are really expensive, but also much more properly into tissue that looks more like real brain, behaves more like it too, and even produces the right cell types. So future iterations may use organoids instead of sheets of neurons. And there's
motherfuckers is gonna build a meat robot. They want to train rat neurons play Doom. It's possible. Your boy Tony Vogue. Mind blown. I don't get half this shit. Original video linked below. Damn.